Welcome back to another episode of Building Enablement, a web series where we talk to enablement professionals and dive deep into the details on programs, trainings, events, basically anything that they want to highlight, what they did, and how they did it. I'm Stephanie Middaugh, and I run enablement at Divvy, a financial tech startup out of the Utah area. And today, my guest is Aaron Evans. Well, come and join us from across the pond. Aaron, how's it
Indeed.
going?
Very good, thank you, Stephanie. Very good indeed. And yourself?
I'm doing good. It's Tuesday today. We're almost like to the middle of the week. Last week was a holiday week for us in the US, so it's always a little bit weird coming back from a holiday week.
I'm sure it is. Yeah. Well, great to be speaking to you, and a big fan of yourself and obviously the series you're doing as well.
Oh, thank you. I've been started to follow him on LinkedIn. He is sharing like some great like insights and stuff on LinkedIn. I'm really excited for our conversation today. So first of all, Aaron, why don't you give our audience just a little bit of insight, background into like who you are, where you're at, what you're doing?
Sure. Well, I work for a company called Global Data, which is the fastest growing business intelligence company on the London Stock Exchange. We are based in London, but we're very much a global business. And looking at it from the sales enablement point of view, I've been doing sales enablement. Well, I like to say I've been doing it since before it was called sales enablement, but I've been doing this for about 13 years now.
Nice.
Basically training, coaching, developing, working with getting sales teams better across the globe. Worked all over the world, lots of different continents, been based in Sydney, been based in Los Angeles, been based obviously in Europe, been based in Toronto. So yeah, global reach, train thousands of salespeople, and have an absolute burning passion for sales enablement.
Love that. That's who I really enjoy talking to is people who have been doing it before it was a thing and they
Yeah,
still enjoy doing it.
we're a rare breed, I'm sure.
Exactly. Awesome. So Aaron, why don't you give us, we had a little bit of a prep session. We talked a little bit about this, but what are we going to be talking about today? What did you want to highlight?
Yeah, sure. So I thought it'd be really interesting to talk about a organisation that we IPO'd in Australia. So we took it from literally 5 or 6 people sitting in a room all the way to floating on the stock exchange in Australia, which is exciting. And I guess that to look at it from a sales enablement angle, what would be sort of quite an interesting tale is about how we scaled it globally from a really small startup. It was basically a tiny little idea, and how we took that idea and we planted the seed and the culture across lots of different places across the globe, and how we eventually got there. So I thought that would be an interesting thing for your listeners to hear.
Yeah, I love that. And I think a lot of us in sales enablement often find ourselves in these small little startups that, have these big dreams of going IPO and going public. And when you start expanding globally, there's so much more that you have to take into account than just like your regional sales reps. And I think this could be a really interesting topic for anybody who's maybe thinking of or already in a company that's, expanding out globally or wants to expand their enablement program and kind of like continue to build. So awesome. I'm excited to jump right in and see it. So when you were like thinking about how to scale like your program and everything kind of globally, what problems were you trying to solve kind of preemptively, like through like your thought process?
It's a really good question to start with. And I was quite lucky because the organization I worked at before I moved into the world of startups was a huge multinational conglomerate like publishing house that was a listed business that was like share price was rising. So I guess I was given the best practice and the tools and the structures and the processes to do that right. So I guess the key lesson and the learning from me is that having looked at that business, although there was a lot of stuff that they did right, there was also a lot of stuff they did wrong. And the reason they did it wrong is because they didn't get it right from day one. So I was in a very fortunate position where by scaling this organization, we could actually start laying the scalability and the groundwork and the structure and the culture down from day one, knowing that we were going to grow. So one of the reasons I took the role is because the responsibility was around the growth. So when we look at it from lessons that I learned, I guess like for me, the key things is that when you're thinking about enablement programs and you're thinking about anything that's going to be adopted in lots of different countries across lots of different positions with lots of different experience points for those reps, start thinking about how scalable it actually is. So if you take this idea, do you need a sales enablement person there to do it live, or can you use tools that can actually embed that training and that process and that learning? And another great place to infiltrate is the managers. I love talking about this because I think it's so important. Sales enablement is one cog in a very, very, very big wheel, right? And what we have to think about is locally, at the local level in which we're training and developing people, if we can get those middle managers or those direct managers on side and basically repeating the right practices and doing the right things, it is a massive shortcut to success. So whenever I was going through the process of getting involved in the hiring process for managers at that local level globally or at different countries, one of the things I looked at was the ability to coach. And a lot of startups don't do that. They just look at track record of delivery. But being able to actually coach and embed the learning and the best practice is absolutely critical.
I agree. And we've talked about this on a couple of my other guests that I've had on, about one, building trust with your reps, but then two, your frontline managers, and making sure that you kind of like have them on board. And I think especially if you're expanding globally, if you're not able to have an enablement person like in region at that point, your frontline managers do then become an extension of your enablement team in a way.
Mhm.
So I love that you kind of called that out specifically. And also thinking, I'm a big believer in like thinking for the future. Like, what does 6 months down the line, what does a year down the line look like? How do we build for that now, or at least start
Mm.
the foundational stuff now, instead of like playing catch up later down the
Yeah.
line? Because I've done both things, and playing catch up later down the line is always going to be way harder if you don't think in the like in advance. And you don't have to necessarily solve for it right at that moment, but just have in the back of your mind, what things are we going to have to identify as we go from like 50 reps to 100 reps to like one country to two countries,
Yeah.
whatever it might be. Solving for those problems earlier, at least starting to talk about them, are always going to help you out in the long run.
Couldn't agree more. I mean, it's simple things as well, like even things like launching a rate card. Start thinking about the price differentiation and the different denominations that you're using as well. It's simple little things like that, which I think are really, really important. When you're delivering videos, as an example, that are going to be scaled across the globe, we often have a centricity to the country that we're in, and we start using the terminology or the even things like the analogies that we use. We kind of stick to what we know. But I've been very conscious from a sales enablement point of view of trying to be inclusive in all that language and inclusive in all the different examples that you use, which seems really simple. But if you're on the other side of the globe and your head office is in the UK, it's just another thing that's going to make you feel isolated and alienated and just an afterthought as a department or as a part of the business. So little things like that really do add up.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think even when you're training sales reps to have those conversations, or you're creating any like training material, the different like just small nuances from like country to country and their business process or how they go about doing things can make such a big impact on all of those things. And it can seem like a daunting task, especially if you're in the US and you're like, how am I going to solve for business nuances in like EMEA or APAC or whatever it might be? And it's just like, just reach out and like find the people who do have that information, that knowledge. But just keep an open mind about like not everything is the same. Even in the US, when you go like state to state, things are different. Like you can only imagine like on a global scale how things are going to be different from that perspective too. So
100%.
I think these are great points. So when you were kind of like, you touched on it a little bit, but let's kind of like dive a layer deeper into it. What exactly, like, how did you go about figuring out in your mind, like walk us through your thought process when you're working on like scaling this globally? Like what were some of the additional things, like in addition to building for scalability and like kind of globally, like what are the other things like underneath all of that that you were thinking about when you were building this out?
It's a really good question. And the way I like to think of it is like this, is that if you imagine that you're the resource that's delivering the information, you've also got to appreciate that you're the resource that's going to be asleep for 8 hours and you're not going to be contactable by half the globe, right? So I always put myself in the position of whenever I'm explaining something or whenever I'm going through something, absolute crystal clear clarity on process, on best practice, on what can and can't be done, on standards is absolutely critical. Because the last thing you want is a rep sitting there going, I don't know what to do and I can't contact this person for 8 hours. Do you know what? I'll just do my own thing. And then it comes back to the management as well, is when you're not there, you've got to realize that the manager's got to enforce this at a local level. I was really, really lucky because and not a lot of sales enablement get this power and not a lot of sales enablement get this opportunity, but my CEO brought me in on almost every single management interview that there was, because he trusted me to check for coachability in the interview process, and also to get a gauge of how much of a I'm trying to think the best way I put this. Leader is this person versus a manager. Now we know obviously management skills are important, but in the grand scheme of things, leadership skills are far more important. So one of the key cornerstones of leadership is being able to make other people better, to bring up reps, to every day improve them. So I was allowed to get involved in that process. So it's a combination of two things, I'd say, is that whenever you're putting processes, structures, content, anything in place, being crystal clear with the clarity, helping them understand the context of what it is, so why we do it the way we do it, and also getting that localized management in place to make sure that they can reinforce the right behaviors and train them to the standard at which you train. You can't be everything to everyone. At some point, you're not going to deal with a rep for 2 or 3 months because you're just too busy. So it's important that the managers can deliver that quality of training and coaching as well.
I think that's a great
all right,
point.
that answer?
Yeah.
Is it all right? A bit of waffle bits.
No, that's perfect.
It's a bit of a waffle, but
no, that's really good. And you make an excellent point around, like, if you have like a smaller enablement team and you're expanding globally, you do have to have those trainings and processes and like things that are available, like for the reps to be able to either find the answer themselves, or they've been trained well enough to just like know what to do, or to your point, like also like make sure the managers know so that they can be a resource for the reps. I remember when I was my time at Alteryx, which was a data analytics company, we were based on the West Coast, and we had just recently kind of like started expanding our EMEA operation, and the time difference between that is just huge. And we didn't have a person in the enablement space like function kind of like there in like geography, like there in EMEA. And we had to figure out like, okay, how do we do this? Like we leveraged our learning management system. We were trying to figure out like content strategy and like all of that, make sure that we had all of that available at our fingertips. And I think that's, not just from like a global perspective, but just in general, making sure that your reps can self-serve and find the information that they need, I think is critically important just to their own success as a professional. Like being able to answer their own questions is huge.
I think it's massively underlooked in the identify stage of a interview process. I really do. Like, I think one thing I've learned in the time that I've been doing this is that if you can draw a line down the middle of people who are self-learners, have the ability to be coached, and the people who are uncoachable and are not self-learners and need to be constantly on the tee, you realize that how much time is wasted with those people. And also as well, like how they just never grow. Like they're incapable of growing. So in lots of organizations I've worked in, is that if you can get this right from day one in terms of the people that you're attracting to your business, and make sure that they've got those soft skills around being coachable, being able to self-analyze, have metacognition skills, all of that stuff, is such a huge time saver down the road. And you're absolutely right. It comes down to the rep. If the rep can do this stuff and they've got the attitude and the capabilities of doing it, it makes your job so much easier, and your manager's job so much easier as well.
Yeah. And I love that you're also touching a lot on this idea of like coaching and coachability. This is a topic that I feel like is coming up and kind of peeking its head in the enablement space more and more and more. And we're seeing this with conversational intelligence tools like Gong and Chorus are coming up, and they're talking about coaching reps and making sure. And you made that very specific distinction between like leaders and managers. And there is a very fine line between there. And I do believe that managers are good at kind of like keeping people up to date with like new processes and like driving the outcomes that they're looking for. But a leader is going to be able to like take that person to the next level. And in order to do that, you have to be able to coach them. And coaching is not, that's a skill. It's a talent in and of itself. And not everybody has that, from like enablement to managers to leaders. Like it can be a difficult thing to find a person who's really, really good at coaching.
No, it's interesting because I think that the cultural shift that organizations need to do, and like not as in like, oh, it would be nice to have, is stop talking about coaching and actually start treating it like a real science and a real skill. We're really lucky in global data where I work now is that it's treated like a competency. It's like, it's the equivalent of saying, in management, from a management point of view, like how good is your reporting? It's the same as how good is your coaching. So we've got a very, very structured coaching framework that we use. We coach to a competency framework as well, which is really, really important. We use those analytics tools. We use Gong as a great way of doing that as well. I'm a massive believer that the role of a manager is deliberately overcomplicated. I don't know why, but it's almost like so much time is spent doing tasks that actually help the next layer of management above you. The manager's role, when you've got direct reports reporting into you, should be to make your reps better every single day. That's number one. That's your job, is to inspire them with the company's vision, which is they come in and they actually feel like they're bought into something, and localize a set of cultures and values that people go, you know what, I love getting out of bed and working for this guy or girl and coming to work every day. The irony of that is the three things I've just described are actually leadership qualities. They're not management qualities. The last one is reporting back on what you've done. Now, in my experience, where do you think most managers spend their time?
It's
Reporting
always
back on what
reporting.
they've done. It is, right? So the funny thing about this is that I coach a lot of managers, and the first thing they say when you teach them a new competency is, no one ever taught me that before. No one's ever sat down and taught me that. And that's the thing, is we neglect that layer of management that is so important to our business, because it makes up so much of an organization. We neglect that around skills, around competency, around coaching frameworks, around the tools they need to do the most important things. Get their reps better every day, inspire them with the company, and set localized values and culture that reps want to stay there and work there forever. So simple.
I've seen that at other companies that I've been at. It's like, coaching is going to be a big initiative. Like, we're going to do it. And then it's like, okay, well, the managers are going to coach. And I'm like, well, how are they going to coach? Like, how do you define coaching? What does that look like? And they're like, well, they're just going to coach them. Like, duh.
Yeah.
And it's one of those things that if you don't show what good coaching is as a leader to like your managers, I think you're doing a disservice to them, because if you say coaching, it's going to mean something different to literally every person in the world. And not everybody understands what that looks like. Someone could be like, well, I coached them on how to close a deal. And it's like, but they needed help coaching on like the discovery or like whatever it was. Like, there's other pieces, and coaching is such a big topic. And I honestly could very much see like a dedicated coach role in enablement start to kind of like bud out a little bit. I could see that being
100%. 100%. In fact, I'd recommend organizations doing it. I think the problem is that there's not a direct line on a spreadsheet somewhere that said this week coaching generated this much revenue. And I think that's the problem, is that upper management or the very, very top echelons of organizations are often looking for that direct, demonstrable ROI from a job role. But the reality of it is that we're becoming much more scientific in sales enablement now. We can see improvement, we can track improvement, incremental improvement as well. And you're absolutely right. If you can have a coach that can work with a rep on a very, very, very single discipline or competency, and over the period of a short period of time improve them in that competency, you've effectively just done maybe 2 or 3 years worth of work in a very short period of time, based on the quality of the competency of the coaching, based on being able to identify the unconscious incompetence and turn it into an unconscious competence by using a framework, and ultimately doing it with speed, because it's their pure focus. They're not doing a million things like a manager is. It's just a coach going in there and going, here's the 3 things you need to work on. We're going to work on these, and then you'll see yourself improve. So I totally agree with you, Steph.
Yeah. I think one of the things that we're seeing too, that at least I've seen recently, a couple of former like managers of mine have actually moved into like manager enablement roles at companies. So I think honestly, like coaching is the next level up outside of that, is like we're enabling our managers now, just like we are our sales reps, which I think is great. And then I think coaching is the next stop on that.
Yeah, I agree.
This is great. So when getting back to kind of like our original kind of like conversation or our topic, I love these little like offshoots of conversations that I always end up having. Did you, when you were like working on like global scale and figuring out like what that looks like, did you go to your executives? Did you have to get buy-in from them, or was it kind of like a duh moment and they were like, well, of course we need to plan for scale and like, globalization? What did that look like, that interaction with like executives?
Yeah, it was an interesting journey, right? Because although we were a startup that eventually IPO'd, the one thing we didn't have was money. And this, the one thing that startups don't have is money, right? So, and I see this a lot in startups, is that it's product based and then sales is an afterthought. So it starts with product a lot of the time, and the CEO is often a product person. And then they turn around and they go, oh shit, someone's got to sell this thing. We need to get a sales leader in. And they're often sort of, they're sort of allured by people with experience. So you'll get a manager who's worked in sales before come in and go, I'm your, panacea or your silver bullet to solving all your sales problems. And they get wooed by this person and like, yes, you come in and do it. And they realize actually they're not that good. So what you really need is someone to come in who almost has not really been a sales manager, but someone who has a real understanding of the process, the structure of sales, and could come in and go, this isn't just about getting a sales rep to sell. This is about building the foundations of how your business is going to transact going forward. So I was really lucky that I trained quite a few of their reps who were working there already. And I trained one of the managers there for when I was consulting. And they brought me on board and said, look, would you want to come in and sort of lay all of our sales process, sales structure down? It wasn't without challenges. Like, you know, like any organization, there's not like a bottomless pit of money that you can go there and go, I need this, I need that. You know, like we were running a lot of stuff through spreadsheets. We were sort of having to sort of, you know, scotch tape stuff together to make it work. But they gave me a lot of freedom to execute, partially because they didn't have the knowledge. But more importantly, they trusted me implicitly to deliver on that. But just to be really clear, we made an absolute ton of mistakes, and I made an absolute ton of mistakes along the way. And if I could go back in time and do it differently, there's an absolute ton of things I'd do differently as well. So I know I'm probably painting the picture like this was this dream scenario where I was given all of this carte blanche and I went in there and nailed it and knocked it out of the park. But no, I messed a lot of stuff up and learned a lot of scar tissue from that job, but useful exercises.
Yeah, I think that's something that, especially in the enablement space, I think you have to have quite a number of just failures, like, and missteps underneath your belt, because ultimately, like, that's how you get better. That's how you know you're like, oh crap, like I did that wrong. I'm not going to do that again. Hindsight is always 2020. And that's usually where I get like my next ideas. Like at my next company, I'd be like, oh, well, I saw this like happen at my last company. Let's not do that. Let's move past that. And I like how you mentioned that, you know, you were the executives or leadership maybe didn't understand what you were doing or like the impact that you could have, but they trusted you enough to like go forward and do that. Not everybody has that fortune to be able to do that. In your opinion, I'm going like a little bit off script there. If you are maybe like an enablement person, you know, that's listening to this and you don't necessarily have the trust of your leaders, what would your advice be to those people? Like, how do you maybe build that trust or get that buy-in from your executives? How would you like recommend people maybe just starting out in their career do that?
It's a really, really, really good question. Genuinely a great question, because I see it a lot when I speak to sales enablement professionals, whether it's me coaching them or hiring them or even interviewing them. And one of the disconnects you often get is, how do we demonstrate value? Like, we know we're valuable. Like if you go and speak to anyone on sales enablement, they'll tell you the place would fall apart if I wasn't here. But how do I get the people at the very top of the organization seeing the value in what I do? And it's really, really simple. You've got to build advocates and champions, and you've got to get them to send you very clear feedback and testimonials of the input that you've given and the result that it's had. And then you collect that information and you're very clear in saying, I'm conscious of the fact that it's often difficult to connect the dots between what sales enablement does and the value that has. Here's a dossier of information that shows you that. And influence through the managers as well. So if you've got managers who have a direct report going up the chain, you've got to build up 2 or 3 champions who see the value in what you do, and get them sitting there waxing lyrical about how great you are. And the value that you bring. Like, times are changing, right? Because you can serve up content at different times in the sales process. You can actually start having some accountability that the people who didn't see this content before they made this call will fail, but the people who did see this content before they made this call were success. You also start seeing things like the way that a new product or a new proposition is articulated. That comes down from how sales enablement has worked with product marketing and helped the reps see that. So if you've got recording technology, you can use that to say, here's again some more evidence of how we're getting people to articulate this information. It's all about building proof points and showing the results of those proof points as well. And be an expert, right? So what I mean by that is that you're not, these people aren't necessarily reporting to you. The sales reps aren't reporting to you, but have an opinion on them, get to know them, get to know their strengths, their weaknesses. If you're sitting in a meeting and someone is talking about a rep and you've got an opinion on them, let your opinion be known and give the reason and the facts behind your opinion as well. The amount of times I sit in a meeting and they say, this person's really good, they're great, we need to celebrate this person. And I say, well, actually, they're only good between this cost point with this type of customer. As soon as you take them out of their comfort zone, they're not very good. My recommendation is that we try and increase their AOV by doing this, this, and this. All of a sudden, you sound like the expert. So that would be my advice: is build advocates and know people so you have an opinion on them as well.
Yeah, I agree. And I think one of the things that can easily be frustrating is when you come into a place and you're maybe not, just kind of revered in enablement as you expect that you maybe should be. Building trust it takes a while. And I still remember like the first time that you have like a big, massive win with like a leader or a manager or somebody, like that is going to hold in your brain. Like that will hold a spot in your brain. I still remember the first time that I actually won over like a sales VP he thought enablement was just a load of like bullshit. And I won him.
That sounds familiar.
And it was like, I still hold on to it. And he just like, after that, he was just like, came to us for everything. So I agree. Once you find and kind of cultivate and create those champions within your organization, it'll take a little bit of time. It'll take a little bit of nurturing, but once you've got them, man, they'll go to the end of the earth for you.
Yeah. And again, I think you're right. And the key thing to remember is that always have this in the back of your mind. You are a change agent. Your job is to go in there to change things. That's why you're there. Change behavior, change competency, change culture, change process. People don't like change. They hate change. So my advice would be is that, you've got to win people over. You've got to slowly win people over and just try and get the little wins. And remember that your job is to change. That's your job, is to change things.
I do agree that like enablement do kind of like come in and we are change agents. And the thing that you can like keep in the back of your mind too with that is like make change as easy as possible, like, and be upfront with your reps. Like I always tell them, like, this is going to be hard for a little bit, but trust me, like there's light at the end of the tunnel. Like we'll get through this. And like, here's everything that you need in order to make that, like that transition kind of like seamless. The more that we can take that burden off of whoever it is that we're kind of like working with at that point in time, I think the easier that'll be. And then again, like as a result of that, you're going to create people who trust in you.
Yeah, and there's, you got to give people context to change as well, right? Like I always use this as an example, right? If I was training you, Steph, and I said to you, go and make me a cup of tea, you'd be like, no, I'm not going to go and make you a cup of tea, because that's compliance, right? I'm asking you to comply to something that I'm asking you to do, right? However, if I turn around to you and said, the quality of my training drops when I'm thirsty, the chances of you learning is going to go down, your ability to earn in the future is going to go down, you're not going to maximize the time, how are you going to solve the problem? Oh, I'll go and make you a cup of tea. That's buy-in. And that's the difference between the two, is that often we go with compliance first. Right, we need to do this, we're going to change, you've got to follow our rules. Because if we just sit down with people and say, look, here's why we're changing. In the end, it's going to be painful, but we're going to be a better company out the back of it. People buy into that and they get on board. So that would be another piece of advice I give people, is that always give the why to change. Don't just go in there swinging the axe and going crazy, because you'll just be known as like a bull in a china shop, and it's not valuable. And I've made that mistake many times.
100%.
Many times.
It can't just be like, do this because we said so. It has to be like, do the, because every time I've done the exact same thing, guys, can you just do this training? They're like, no, this is stupid. But the second that you put a tangible or an understandable outcome, or like why it's going to benefit them, especially if you're working, I found this, if you're working with a more mature and knowledgeable sales force, they need the explanation as to like, why should I do this? Like, why is this necessary? So younger sales force, usually they'll just be like, okay, like they'll just kind of like do it because they're just like absorbing all this information. The more mature sales force are the guys who have been around the block for a while longer. They're just like, no.
Totally agree. It's always the biggest challenge, is people who, because they've been there a long time, they've seen the change before, they're probably earning good money at the moment, so the change is only going to affect them negatively. So you're often greeted with sort of, why should I change? You're absolutely right. Because if you've got a grad who's been doing it for 15 minutes, it's like, I'll do whatever you want me to do.
Yeah.
And they're not quite as like weathered and jaded by sales yet. They feel the need to fight this particular argument, but you're absolutely right.
I particularly love the jaded, like more mature sales reps. I just find them like once you've won them over, they will be your best friends forever. But I am jaded and kind of crotchety myself, so I love interacting with those guys.
So you see yourself in them is basically what you're saying, right? No, I the thing is, I find them the biggest challenge, right? And I always have to remind myself of this, right? And this is so important. And I've spoken about this a lot in the past, but I think it's something that's critical, is that It comes down to learning styles. Sometimes I sit there and I think, why is this bastard just deliberately picking up on everything that I'm saying and trying to challenge it? And then I sit there and go, do you know why? Because that's what you would do if you were in the classroom, and that's how I learn. I literally break things apart. I try and see how broken they are and whether I can put them back together. And then I go, oh, now I understand it. You were right. But I have to step back sometimes and realize that people aren't just trying to be dickheads. They're like, it's just how they learn. And sometimes you can have a bit too much ego where you think they're there just to sort of like foil you. But no, it's important. It's very important.
I completely agree. And anybody who's listening, who I actually trained to be a teacher in college. So like learning styles is just kind of comes naturally to me. If you haven't researched any kind of like learning styles or anything, and you're in enablement in charge of like any kind of training programs, highly, highly recommend just do a quick Google search and go out there and like learn some different ways and methods on like how people learn. Because honestly, like to your point, Aaron, they're not being difficult, or that maybe they are, but like they're not trying to be difficult.
Yeah.
They just need to, like, that's their process. That's how they understand
Yeah.
things. 100%. I agree.
You're spot on. You're spot on. I guess teachers have that more than anyone, right? You've got 30 people sitting in the class, and they're all finding their learning styles as well, right? It must be hard. Lee styles are fully formed, the people that we teach.
Exactly.
Fully grown human beings.
Exactly. Awesome. I am loving this conversation so far. Kind of getting back to our initial topic again. Ultimately, like when you were thinking about like what you wanted to achieve when you were kind of like first setting out on creating scalability and like globalization, looking back on it now, did you ultimately like achieve the outcomes that you wanted from that?
Yes, I did. But I have to take recognition to the point that I took it as far as I could take it at that time in my life. I mean, this was 2014, so this was 2013, 2014. This was 6 years ago. So again, like talking about the lessons that I learned, like I could take it to the IPO, but then the conversations become very different when you're a listed business, and shareholders are having very different conversations with you. And it's the quarterly cadence. It's quarterly meetings where you're sitting there and going, right, like how are we actually looking as a business this month? Two things I learned in that process. Number one is that how quickly culture can change as you grow. So it taught me about how you maintain really important parts of culture that are kind of the spine and the backbone of the culture that you want to keep. And second of all is that it's almost like two stages of humans, right? Is that you've got people who are in the trenches who want to come and fight and IPO a business, and they get excited and they get roused by that objective. But then when you get there, you start hiring a different type of person as an organization, and you often get just comfort. People are a bit more comfortable now that you've gone through the hard growth and the sort of the scar tissue. So they're the lessons that I learned. So once we completed the task, I was almost at the point where I was like, I don't know how much more value I can bring to the organization. And they agreed with me because they got rid of me, right? So they sat there and said, look, we're going to have to make you redundant because, your role's kind of expired, as it were. So I felt like it was a really big achievement in my career, and I was really proud of it. And I remember sort of messaging my mum the day we IPO'd, sort of with a solitary tear in my eye, very, very happy. But yeah, I feel like I achieved what I needed to achieve, but I learned a lot in the following 6 months after we'd IPO'd as well, which were really valuable lessons. Did that answer your question?
Absolutely. No, and I give you incredible kudos to realize that you were like, once you kind of like hit that mark, you were like, okay, like I'm kind of like out of the water now. Like this is past like my skill set. This is maybe past what I know how to do or I have experience doing in the past. That's not an easy thing for people to recognize, that like I've done everything I can, based on like what I have to give. Like, this is it. Massive kudos to you to point that out. Cause I think a lot of people would just be like, well, like we're just gotta go with it and see what happens and learn along the way.
I appreciate that. But I think a large thing that drives me doing what I do is the fun that I have doing it and the enjoyment I have from doing it. Your head should spring off the pillow every morning knowing that you're making a difference. And when you don't feel like you're adding the same value anymore, both the company and yourself are on a losing streak. And at some point, you just got to turn around and go, I need to do something that I enjoy more. And my advice to people in sales enablement as a whole is that you've got to be driven by enjoying it, because it's not an easy role. But we're really lucky that we've got that touch point with a person where we can improve a person. And when you improve a person, you're not just improving them for the workplace, you're improving them as a human being as well. You're teaching them to think, think in a certain way as opposed to think a certain thing. And we're really fortunate that we can do that in our job, that we can inspire and develop young people, all types of people, because it is a real gift. And if you're not motivated by it, you're probably in the wrong profession, is what I'd say.
100%. I agree. I took a detour like right after I got my first sales enablement position. I took a detour back into sales operations. And after like a year there, I was like, God, what am I doing? Like, this is not the right space for me. And like, I was good at it and like it worked. But at the same time, like to your point, I wasn't getting up every day just being like, yeah, like I am going to go build some reports in Salesforce or like fix some accounts or something. That wasn't what sparked my fire. And I think that's a really good feedback to anybody who's doing this. Like, if you're not, there are going to be difficult days. There are going to be difficult weeks and months and quarters, like 100%. But if you're still not like ultimately driven, like in the pit of your stomach, like in some way, shape or form, it's just, everybody's going to kind of notice. You're going to, feel bad for it. Like it just kind of like all in all, it doesn't work.
No, I agree. I wholeheartedly agree.
Awesome. Aaron, this has been fantastic conversation. One of the things that I like to always just like leave people with is some kind of like actionable insight or takeaway that they could like take from our session and like implement in their enablement practice like tomorrow or next week or whatever. What's something just based on like, either our conversation around like global scaling or globalization or whatever it might be, or coaching or anything that we've kind of discussed today, what do you think is an actionable insight that somebody could take away from this?
Yeah, so it's a good question. I think like for me, it always comes back to coaching. Like you should be spending most of your day doing good quality coaching, and you should be using every opportunity and every interaction that you have with a human being as a way of coaching in some way, getting them to think about something in a different way through the way that you question them. So the actionable insight I'd give you is that if you can't clearly articulate what coaching is, then go and look it up now and go and learn about what quality dynamic coaching looks like. And then start using those disciplines and then competencies as soon as possible, because I think it's the bedrock of any organization is great coaching, be able to spot unconscious incompetence and move someone through the competency matrix until they're good at something. That would be my actionable insight. And obviously follow your wonderful web series that everyone's watching and adoring. That would be the other piece of advice I give you.
I'll slip you a 20 on the down low for that.
Make sure it's not dollars though. Yeah, make sure it's pounds.
That's true. I'll make sure to do that. Aaron, thank you so much for joining me today and having this conversation. I loved kind of like going off on all these different tangents and tracks with you. It was such a great conversation.
The pleasure was all mine, and thank you so much for having on. It's been a real honor.
Awesome. Thank you so much. And thanks to our viewers for watching. If you or somebody that you know in the enablement community would be great to highlight on this show, please tag them or thread them in the comments below. Make sure to connect with Aaron on LinkedIn. He shares some really great insights almost daily. I've seen kind of your posts on there. So definitely follow Aaron, connect with him. And if you like this video, definitely hit the thumbs up button and be sure to subscribe. I try and upload videos every single week with different enablement professionals. And until next time, keep building, everybody.